Just real quick before we start, a little area of kind of house cleaning, kind of letting you in behind the curtain as I am to do here on Geek Therapy Radio. I got an email from South Korea recently. Shout out South Korea. Thank you so much for tuning in. But he mentioned that he gets like local Texas ads in South Korea. I just want to address, I don't control the ads that go on to Geek Therapy Radio. It is a point of contention with me, actually, that so many freaking ads are put onto my radio show that not just because I don't see a dime of it, but because I don't have any control over what y'all hear. So I don't approve of the ads that go on the show. I certainly don't necessarily endorse any of the ads that you hear on this show. But I will let you know that I am looking into talking with the radio station that still hosts my radio show, and I still love all of them over there at iHeartRadio and KPRC 950 AM. I have my radio show broadcast on there from 2017 to 2024. I ended the broadcast part of Geek Therapy Radio just because I had my second child, and there's just way too much to do, and doing a radio broadcast every week really, it was a struggle. So I called them up and I said, hey, go ahead and sell my airtime to infomercials or something like that, but I can't provide a weekly radio show anymore. It's just too much. But they happily agreed to continue to host the back end of the podcast. So that's why you still hear all the ads, even though I don't have any control over them. So I am working on, this is the point I want to make, I am working on migrating my RSS feed over to my own back end on Spreaker that I pay for out of my own pocket, that will not have any ads, any interjected commercial breaks in there, because why? And if I do get sponsored, if there are sponsors for Geek Therapy Radio, I will read those spots within the content. So I am working on migrating my RSS feed over to my own personal account. I have to make sure that's all legit and above board with iHeart, but I am working on that. I don't foresee any bumps because I still have a great relationship with them. So I'm working on migrating the podcast over to my own back end, where you don't hear any of those ads. That said, what I'm concerned with is confusion. What I'm concerned with is you being already subscribed to Geek Therapy Radio podcast and me migrating it over to my own personal account, and there being some sort of flub in unavailability. Like you try to download latest episode, or you try to go play a past episode and it says podcast not available. I hope that the switch is seamless and that on your end it is seamless and you don't even notice anything other than, hey, there's no more ads on all my podcasts. But we'll see how it goes. The question would arise then is, would I start this from scratch? How many would come over to the new Geek Therapy Radio podcast if I have to start the back end from scratch? If it disappears from your podcast app, are you even going to notice that it disappeared? And would most people have the wherewithal, or not the wherewithal, because you'll have the wherewithal, but would you have the intent to notice that Geek Therapy Radio was missing and then look it up again and then resubscribe to Geek Therapy Radio? I know a lot of my ride or dies would. I know I would get the emails. My email would not be changed. My email is not attached to iHeartMedia at all. My email is johnny@geektherapyradio.com. I did a lot of legwork and groundwork before I started the podcast, and as I went to kind of prepare for the day that I might have to migrate over to a different back end, so that I made sure to keep my email not attached to iHeart. I made sure to keep various other factors of Geek Therapy Radio kind of under my control should iHeart ever pull the plug. And again, I'm not bad-mouthing iHeart at all. It's just you don't know what the future holds. So hopefully the migration process will be easy. I see on the back end of Spreaker it says you can migrate podcast over from a different back end. So we'll see if that is painless, but that's in the works. I don't control the ads. I'm sorry for the ads that you hear on Geek Therapy Radio currently. Thank you for bearing with me. And with that, let's get into it. Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I'm actually sitting in the studio right now, in the Geek Therapy Radio studios, which is just kind of the upstairs converted playroom. And when I say playroom and you're thinking, oh, you got a big house, you got a big giant playroom. No, it's like a 10 by 10 or like a 10 by 8 rectangle here at the top of the stairs, and there's 2 doors off of it. But anyways, I'm back behind the good mic. I think I've got my audio settings kind of sussed out here with my AORS 17H and Tascam US 2020 whatever, and Universal Audio 4710D, whatever. It's the big setup, and it's frustrating. I've mentioned a year ago, whenever I got this Gigabyte AORS 17H, that I have had nothing but kind of audio issues and glitches with it, and it made it frustrating to use this laptop for any sort of audio production work, especially audio recording work. But at the moment, I think I've got it sussed out. I'm also, for the first time in Geek Therapy Radio history, recording this straight into DaVinci Resolve. I've been moving so much of my workflow, all of my workflow, into DaVinci Resolve. I have been editing my podcasts in DaVinci Resolve when I'm recording them with my DJI mics 2s, and now I'm actually doing all my recording. For this episode, I'm doing my recording directly into DaVinci Resolve. So that's kind of the name of the game, is simplifying and streamlining the process. So if this works out fine, especially on this AORS 17H that I'm using for the brains of this whole operation, great. The less apps and less software you have to bounce between and record into and transfer out and import into other things. That's one of the beautiful things about DaVinci Resolve, is that it can do a whole heck of a lot. Now, while the audio page of DaVinci Resolve, Fairlight Audio, is super useful for video editing, obviously something like Reaper is going to be a bit better for actual music production. I don't think DaVinci Resolve it's not catered to that necessarily. I'm sure there's ways around it. I'm sure there's a huge learning curve to kind of do exactly what I did in Reaper and Cakewalk Sonar and in Pro Tools. I'm sure there is ways to do most of it in DaVinci Resolve, but that's not really what DaVinci Resolve, the audio suite in DaVinci Resolve, is designed for. But the fact that I can just record straight in DaVinci Resolve and have great EQ and have great compression and have great even audio effects built in, and be able to do all my audio work for a podcast, at least in DaVinci Resolve, is pretty cool. For instance, I'm not going to have to use any noise reduction, theoretically, on this podcast because I'm in a controlled environment and I'm using my handy-dandy, trusty MXL V67G that I bought back in 2003 with kind of my last $100, and I've been using it for over 20 years since. It is my workhorse. Quick reminder, if you want to hear more of me doing kind of deeper dive podcasts, more well-researched podcasts, more highly produced podcasts, check out the Beyond Bones podcast from the Houston Museum of Natural Science. I, of course, will include a link in the podcast description for Geek Therapy Radio here. But if you want to search in your favorite podcast app, just search HMNS or Houston Museum of Natural Science Beyond Bones podcast and look for the purple color scheme. And that's how you know you've got me over there at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. All right, so I want to move directly into a couple subjects that I specifically wanted to bring up today. One that is fresh on my mind because I just watched it. I just got done watching Apple's new MacBook Pro announcement movie. You know, it's 15-20 minutes long, somewhere in that ballpark. And I'll just be honest with you, just to jump right into it, just to get right to the brass tacks, jump right into the deep end. The thumbnail and the intro of the video made me legit think that, this MacBook Pro is getting a touchscreen. No. The way that the hello was written out on as the thumbnail and as kind of the teaser, I was like, that looks like a touch input and someone drawing cursive with their finger hello onto a MacBook Pro screen. That's not what it is. It's not a touch screen. We're still waiting for the day, if it will ever come, if it ever needs to come, frankly, that the MacBook Pro gets a touch screen, that any Mac laptop gets a touch screen. Not the touchscreen. I thought we didn't get the touchscreen. I thought that by the thumbnail and the teaser that, this is the year we get the touchscreen. I'm not going to get into the pedantics of all the specs of the MacBook Pro. It's powered by the M4. You can get the M4 Max and the M4 Pro or vice versa. The takeaway from it in 24 hours of battery life, yes, it is more powerful than the M3 chip. But here's the actual takeaway from it. I've heard a lot of people kind of in the tech space complain about this or postulate about this or be concerned or puzzled by this. Why does Apple always compare their benchmarks and performance improvements to the M1 chip? You know, I've heard reviewers and different commentators in the tech space kind of say that it's deceptive to keep comparing to the M1 rather than comparing to the M3 because, for instance, M4 to M3 is not that big of a jump across the board. There are definitely improvements, but it sounds way more impressive to talk about the improvement in performance across all areas: neural engine, GPU, CPU, encoding, codecs, all sorts of things, and comparing that to the M1 rather than the M3 because it's more impressive to compare it to the M1 than it is to the M3. Now, why is that? Oh, that's deceptive. That's Apple being deceptive. Apple being Apple. So here's my takeaway. Another way to think about it. And perhaps I'm not alone in this. Perhaps other tech reviewers, tech commentators have mentioned this, but it kind of dawned on me. Back in 2020, when the first M1 came out, let's fast forward a year and say, the next year, whenever it was that they announced the M2, I said the best thing about the Apple M2 is that now you can get refurbished M1 models for much cheaper. That still holds true even all the way into M4. The reason why, in my opinion, in my estimation, why Apple keeps comparing the performance of M4 to the M1 is because a lot of us still have M1s, and a lot of people are still buying used or refurbished M1 chips. The same thing for M2, M3, M4. The best thing about M2, M3, and now M4 is that you can get an M1 MacBook Pro or MacBook Air all the cheaper. And there are still people buying refurbished M1 laptops because they are so good. There are still people that have held on to their M1 MacBooks Airs and MacBook Pros, me included, because the M1 is so good. And now you can get it at a huge cost savings. I remember that I had at the time, 13.3-inch MacBook Pro. Loved it. M1 chip, all that. After M2, maybe it was into M3, I said, I'm going to upgrade my MacBook Pro 13-inch M1, but I'm not going to upgrade to M2. I'm not going to update to M3. I'm just going to update to a 16-inch MacBook Pro, M1 MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip. I think it's the M1 Pro chip in there. And I have not looked back. It has been a fantastic laptop that you got for something like $1,000 cheaper than launch. I have no regrets. I use my 16-inch M1 MacBook Pro nearly every day. It is the laptop that I slide into my rolling case when I go to the museum, when I go to work, when I go anywhere to do anything. The laptop that I take with me is that M1 MacBook Pro 16-inch. So, getting back to my thought, the reason why Apple keeps comparing, the M4 now to the M1 is because so many people are holding on to their M1 MacBook Pros and their M1 MacBook Airs. So you're trying to convince your own customer base to upgrade, to get rid of your M1 and move over to M4, when a lot of us are still kind of, M1's great. I'm still doing everything I need to do with my M1 chip. Video editing is great. Photo editing is great. The battery life is still great for the M1 chip. It's just great. You can argue this. If you're an Apple person, if you do way more intensive work than I do, than video editing, say, it could be something to be said for going from M1 to M4. But for most people, for the workloads of the masses, there isn't yet a big enough incentive to go from M1 to finally ditch your M1 and spend or $2,000 extra or whatever it's going to be. I think the new M Pro start out under $2,000. I think they start at like $1,600 or $1,700. Don't quote me on that, but they start out under $2,000. M4 MacBook Pros start under $2,000. But still, that's still around $2,000, and if you spec it up, you're going to be way over $2,000. There's not enough incentive for a lot of people, me included, to spend a new, let's just say $2,000 on a new M4 MacBook Pro. Is there $2,000 worth of improvements to workflow and improvements to power versus M1? In my opinion, just for what I do personally, no. And I think a lot of people are in that camp of, hey, M1 is still working out great for what I do. We're still getting new updates to Mac OS, and things are just sailing. I'm still getting 16 hours of battery life or whatever. I love editing video on the go in DaVinci Resolve on my M1 16-inch MacBook Pro, not because it's super powerful. I leave it in low power mode. When I am just not attached to the wall, I have it preset. You can, in the power settings and the battery settings, you can set it to continue to run in performance mode and high performance mode when it's not plugged in. But I run it in low power mode, power conservation mode when I'm not plugged in, and I'm editing 4K video content. They're not super Hollywood. I don't have, 70 tracks loaded into DaVinci Resolve. It's usually, probably maybe 10 tracks max. Usually it's between like 4 and 6 tracks that I'm editing 4K, and I'm converting to ProRes and caching it and doing all that kind of stuff. I leave it in low power mode because it's just fine and dandy in low power mode, and I can edit all day. My body gives out before the battery gives out when I'm editing 4K content on my M1 MacBook Pro 16-inch. And therein lies the rub. I have no reason, no incentive, no desire to upgrade from M1 to M4. Apple knows that. Apple knows that. I'm not alone. There's probably somebody listening to this podcast that is in the same camp. They've still got their M1 MacBook Air, and they're like, dang, this thing still crushes. So it's kind of convincing your existing customer base to upgrade, where a lot of people haven't probably upgraded enough. And you can speculate, you can call me out on that, saying, Johnny, I don't think that's the case. But then why four generations into M1 chips are they still comparing to M1? When M5 comes out, I would not be surprised if they're still comparing. Oh, it's up to 2 times faster video encoding than M1 chips, because still by the 5th generation of M chip, people are still holding on to their M1s. They still mention it. Apple still compares to the M1. It's not me just being a conspiracy theorist. Apple still compares their own products to M1. M1, that shift to ARM-based processing, M1, and again in 2020, I said this, watch. Intel is going to, or not Intel, you're going to start seeing Windows laptops on ARM architecture. They're going to switch over to ARM architecture. They're using Snapdragons, and that's happened. Snapdragon X Elite. We're seeing Windows on ARM really being fleshed out, and they are awesome chips. That happened. It wasn't me just being an oracle or anything like that. Everyone saw the writing on the wall. Apple went to in-house ARM-based architecture, and now the rest of the industry would follow. I said, mark my words. In 2020, I said, mark my words. The industry is going to follow this. This is Apple actually doing something, dare I say, innovative. I know that triggers a lot of fanboys and girls on both sides, but the shift to M1 was I said it wasn't dropping a pebble in the pond. It was tossing Mount Everest in the ocean. Like it was a huge paradigm shift across the entire industry. And Apple's M1 silicon was so good, and I was like, this is going to be great for years to come. I said, this M1 is going to be good for probably 10 years. 7 to 10 years, M1's still going to absolutely slay, possibly even be supported by Apple for that entire time also. And it's true. Obviously, we're on M4. Apple keeps comparing M4 to M1 in their own copy. So, yeah. The best thing about M4 is that now you're going to be able to get M1 laptops all the cheaper. Now, there are other areas of improvement if that maybe you really need. Maybe you really need 1,000 nits of SDR screen brightness. Maybe you really do need 16 nits of peak HDR content. Maybe I do like that there's going to be an option for a more matte screen gloss instead of just having a glassy screen, super reflective and basically unusable outside. That now you're going to have a more less reflective display option available. That's really cool. There are kind of these quality of life improvements, obviously, between the generations that might be important to a lot of people. But to most people, I would argue, M1 based MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs still check that box. I've been thinking and noodling actually with the idea of like, you know what? I miss my 13-inch MacBook Pro. And I've been canoodling with the idea of waiting for the price to drop on 13-inch MacBook Airs. They don't have to be super duper powerful, but just having a very small yet very capable 13-inch laptop back in my kind of daily rotation. I have no need for it. This is not something that like, oh, this is really going to fill a gap in my life. It's just M1 has gotten so cheap. M1 is still so good that if I could get an M1 MacBook Air 13-inch for under $500, like under $600, I might like sell another laptop to get it. Who knows? That's neither here nor there. It's not on my radar of something that I need, but M1 is, I'm just saying M1 is still so good that I'm like, hey, maybe I'll get another 13-inch M1 laptop. Maybe M2 will be all the cheaper now. And maybe I'll get a 13-inch M2 MacBook Air just for super light on the go, run and gun, editing and doing whatever I need to do. So that's that. They still compare M4 to M1 because people still buy M1s and people still have M1s and people haven't upgraded from their M1s. Hence why they still compare to M1. That's my piece on that. Let's move on. I was wrong about DJI Neo firmware update. I said that before the October 6th DJI Neo North American release, that DJI would release a major firmware update to address all the scathing reviews about video quality coming out of the DJI Neo. DJI, as I've mentioned, sent me my DJI Neo for some reason on September 29th. And I said, okay, I'll give it a week. I'll play with it a week. Maybe by October 6th, they'll come out with a major firmware update. No, actually, the last firmware update, I think, was on September 29th, if I'm not mistaken, up to firmware 1.300, which fixed some tracking issues and did fix some video issues, not many. I'm waiting for the firmware update that kind of adds more options, more settings in video, especially in standalone mode, that you'll be able to tether your Neo to your phone and be able to kind of bake in the settings you want for the next time you restart the drone and you're using handheld mode. You can say, all right, in standalone mode, I want these settings for video, and it kind of bakes it into the memory, and next time you use it in standalone mode, you've got your reduced sharpness, your reduced noise reduction, or increased noise reduction, whatever you're going for. I thought we would get an update like that. Also, I thought the update, whenever it happens, and I'm still wagering. I just wouldn't be surprised if this major update, it's going to come sooner than later. DJI has a track record of doing this. I've harked on the DJI Mavic 3 Pro, where the super telephoto lens was basically unusable at launch, and for a couple months after launch, it was just the image quality coming out of that sensor was garbage. And then in a subsequent firmware update, they've added more options and 10-bit video, and you could record now log flat profiles with the super telephoto lens. I believe the super telephoto lens on the Mavic 3 Pro is the same half-inch sensor that they use in the DJI Neo. That half-inch sensor appears all across their product board. If you go to DJI's website and you look at the specs across different drones and different generations of drones, that half-inch sensor shows up all over the place. So I know that half-inch sensor is capable of doing more. So I know in the DJI Neo, it is capable of doing more. In fact, when you go into these settings, if you tether the DJI Neo to your smartphone or to an RC, you can see a setting under video, color profiles. The only selectable color profile right now on your phone and attached to an RC is normal color profile. So an update's coming. I bet we're going to at least get a flat color profile with the DJI Neo for when you're using it with your phone or you're tethered to an RC. Whether we get 10-bit or not, I don't know. The reason why I don't think we'll get 10-bit necessarily is because it is a $200 drone, and maybe DJI doesn't want to cannibalize their own kind of product line by offering 10-bit and D-Log color profiles to their $200 drone. So if we don't see 10-bit and we don't see D-Log added to the drone, to the DJI Neo, it's probably just because it's a $200 drone. That said, still wouldn't be surprised if they add D-Log or D-Log M or whatever flat color profile to the DJI Neo for when you're flying at least paired to an RC. As it stands right now, currently, even with firmware 1.300, binding your DJI Neo to the DJI RC N3, you get so much more control over your color. You can adjust sharpness, you can adjust noise reduction. Of course, you get the ISO adjustments, white balance, shutter speed, all that kind of good stuff. You can get good image quality out of the DJI Neo when you are paired to an RC. But I was wrong about the release of, let's call it DJI firmware 1.400. Watch me release this podcast and 1.400 comes out and I'm just like, well, yeah, there it is. So, yeah, I still love the DJI Neo. It's the most fun I've had with a drone since I got my very first drone, and was the very first time you get into the sky, you get a camera into the sky. It was one of those like moments of like, I am living in the 21st century. I am living in the future. This is so cool. The feeling with the DJI Neo, though, is just a whole heck of a lot of fun. It is just a blast. Even at $200, even if you don't buy an RC, it is just a blast to use, especially in standalone mode. It's just a hoot. I have no buyer's remorse at all for the DJI Neo. One of the rubs, though, for me with the DJI Neo and like recommending it to people is if you want the most out of it, you have to also bundle it with the DJI RC N3. And when you bundle it with the remote with the RC, you're up over $300. You're around $330, $350. And if that's what you're going for, like you really want to pair a drone to an RC and you want that kind of level of control over it, then you got to look at the DJI Mini 4K, which comes with an RC and is $300. It's $30 or $50 cheaper than a Neo with a remote control. It's not, there's different use case scenarios for both, but I would say if somebody is looking to up their kind of video editing and recording capabilities and their drone capabilities, and they don't really care about the handheld modes and all the different kind of features that come with the Neo and the built-in cage around the props and all that kind of stuff, I'd say if you're only going to get one drone, if you're just one, I'd recommend the Mini 4K for $300 versus a Neo and an RC for over $300. But it's up to you. I have no buyer's remorse with a Neo. I saw a review, I forget what channel it was on YouTube, that the dude sent he didn't like it so much, he was so disappointed by it that he sent it back. And I'm like, did you? We really it's a $200 drone. I disagreed with, to each their own, but he said he sent it back. I'm like, really? Did you really send it back? I mean, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but again, DJI greatly improves their products over firmware updates. They have a long track record of doing that. So obviously I'm not a shill for DJI. I'm not being paid by DJI. It's just DJI Neo is really fun. I was wrong about their release for the major firmware update, but I do believe it's inbound. A point I did want to bring up, though, is I've been looking at the specs between the DJI Neo and the DJI Mavic 3 Pro, specifically for the sensor that is used between both of them. So the DJI Mavic 3 Pro obviously has 3 sensors, but the super telephoto sensor is the half-inch sensor. Is it the half-inch sensor? Is it the same half-inch sensor that the DJI Neo uses? The DJI Neo uses a half-inch sensor. Both of them are 12 megapixel. I am led just the logistics of it all, just the economics of it all, that it's the same actual sensor being used between the DJI Neo's half-inch sensor and the DJI Mavic 3 Pro's half-inch sensor, and the half-inch sensor that is used across other DJI products. Why would you have it doesn't make any logical, logistical, financial sense to be sourcing different half-inch sensors, which leads me to believe that it's the same half-inch sensor, whether it's on the $200 DJI Neo or it's the super telephoto sensor on the DJI Mavic 3 Pro. The bit of The thoughts that I have, it has to do with the read and write speeds and the output and the megabits per second of, output from the half-inch sensor on the DJI Neo. On the DJI Neo, the maximum data rate is 75 megabits per second. That's the maximum video data rate on the DJI Neo is 75 megabits per second. The internal read and write speed of the memory on the DJI Neo, however, I've stated in a previous podcast, is around and over 200 megabits per second sustained. 75 megabits coming out of the sensor, read and write speed of internal memory is 200 megabits per second, leads you to believe that there is more meat on the bone, hence the upgrades coming to color profiles, possibly 10-bit, possibly log color profiles coming to the DJI Neo. The only thing that might hold it back is the $200 price point. There might be some fear of cannibalizing. That being said, DJI has added a lot more capabilities to that half-inch sensor when used in the Mavic 3 Pro and used in other drones. So I was looking at the specs. Okay, the half-inch sensor on the Neo and the half-inch sensor on the Mavic 3 Pro, and I'm thinking maybe just because the internal read and write speed is 200 megabits per second doesn't mean that the sensor can output 200 megabits per second or anything over 75 megabits. Maybe it's capped. That maybe that sensor is just capped at 75 megabits per second, no matter what drone it's used in. But I was looking at the specs. 75 megabits per second cap current on the DJI Neo, but you look at the same exact sensor on the Mavic 3 Pro, and it is, I'm looking at the specs right now in front of me as I'm recording here since I'm in the studio, same 12 megapixel sensor, but at a data rate of the tele camera, the half-inch sensor can do a data rate, ProRes 422 HQ at a data rate of 1,768 megabits per second. So, if it's the exact same sensor, then theoretically it can do up to 780 whatever megabits per second, or certainly 120 megabits per second, maybe even 150 megabits per second. So all lends more to my theory of there's a big firmware update incoming that possibly includes massive upgrades to the video settings and codecs and things that you can use in color profiles for the Neo. But yeah, I'll leave my piece there. So, talked about Apple, talked about DJI Neo updates, and I'm using the good microphone. Hopefully there's no audio anomalies, no pops and clicks. Hopefully there's not too many, because I really don't want to go back and re-record this. Anyways, thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. You are worthy of love. You're worthy of giving love, receiving love, and you're worthy of your own self-respect. Check out the Beyond Bones podcast from the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Look for the purple color scheme there. I will, of course, include a link to it below, probably to Spotify or Apple or both, or maybe just to the landing page on the museum website. But at any rate, thank you all so much for listening. Talk to you next time.